Dad moves in his soon-to-be bride, and after she gets pregnant, she demands I leave the house because she needs my room. I tell her, "Lady, I own the house." Her smirk disappeared instantly, and what followed was absolute chaos. Here's how it all started. About 9 years ago, my mom passed away from cancer. I was just 12 years old then. Now I'm 21. My dad was a wreck, and no one really knew what to do with me. Thankfully, my grandparents lived just outside the city on a decent piece of land with a house that, while a bit worn down, still had solid bones. After Mom's death, it made sense for me to stay with them. Dad would come on weekends, holidays, whenever he could. The house itself was solid. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a big kitchen, and it sat on about 3 acres backing up to the woods. But even as a kid, I noticed Dad had a thing about control. Everything had to be done his way, on his timeline, and with his approval. He'd arrive on weekends and immediately start rearranging things, telling Grandpa how to maintain the property properly, and making decisions about my life without asking anyone. My best friend Ian lived just 10 minutes down the road. He's been my ride or die since we were building forts in those same woods. My mom was an only child, and I'm an only child too. So, when my grandparents started declining a few years back, guess whose name was the only one in the will? That's right, mine. When Grandpa passed, I inherited everything. The house, the land, his beat-up old pickup truck that still runs, and a decent amount of savings. Dad had used Mom's life insurance to renovate parts of the house over the years, but he acted like he was doing me some huge favor. Like I should be eternally grateful for him investing in the place. I found out about the inheritance when the lawyer called after the funeral. Dad was standing right there when I got the call. The look on his face when he realized I owned the house we all lived in wasn't embarrassment. It was irritation, like I'd just complicated his life by existing. Ian was there that day, helping me sort through Grandpa's tools. After Dad walked away, Ian just smirked and said, "So you own the house now? Damn. Thanksgiving is going to be awkward." But we never talked about it again. Dad pretended it never happened and kept acting like he was the man of the house, deciding what we watched on TV, when I could have friends over, everything. About 2 years after Mom died, Dad started dating again. At first it was just casual, coffee dates, dinners. Then about 6 months ago, he dropped a bomb. He had a serious girlfriend. Her name was Jennifer, a 30-year-old preschool teacher with 2 kids under 10 and enough emotional baggage to stock a therapy office. Jennifer had this young professional mom aesthetic. White SUV, always spotless, athleisure outfits, and endless opinions about organic food whether you asked or not. Her kids, Hunter and Paisley, yes, names straight off a country club roster, were perfectly groomed but had the manners of tiny sociopaths. The first time Dad brought her over, she walked around the house taking mental notes, muttering about what needed work and should be replaced. I even caught her opening cabinets, checking expiration dates in the pantry. She ran her finger along the vintage wallpaper and said, "Your grandmother had such interesting taste. It's so authentic, very lived in." The way she said lived in sounded like a polite way of saying trashy. Dad, of course, ate it up. "Jennifer has such great design sense," he gushed. "She's got so many ideas for improvements." Her kids were worse. Hunter, maybe 8, spent the visit touching everything he wasn't supposed to touch, while making direct eye contact with me. Paisley, 6, accidentally, knocked over Grandma's favorite plan and then looked at me like it was my fault. When I mentioned it, Jennifer just laughed. "Oh, kids will be kids. They're just excited to have so much space." That evening, Ian dropped by and caught the tail end of their visit. After they left, he looked at the throw pillows Jennifer had rearranged and said, "Well, she seems fun. Nothing says, I'm not planning to redecorate your whole life like moving furniture on the first visit." Dad was hooked. He started spending more money on dates, bought new clothes, even got his teeth whitened. Classic midlife crisis. Except instead of a motorcycle, he'd found himself a ready-made family that came with built-in validation. Jennifer played her part perfectly, always asking for his opinion, letting him feel like the strong provider. Within 3 months, she'd practically moved in. Her stuff was in Dad's bathroom, her car was in the driveway more than at her apartment, and her kids had claimed the guest room like they owned it. The angelic behavior vanished. Hunter started accidentally breaking my things. Paisley would sneak into my room when I wasn't home and mess with my stuff. and Jennifer's response was always that I just wasn't used to having kids around. Dad always took her side. They're just kids. Cut them some slack. By month 4, she'd gone from grateful guest to woman of the house. She rearranged furniture while Dad was at work, replaced Grandma's dish towels with her organic ones, threw out food she didn't like, and replaced it with overpriced alternatives. And she started talking to me like I was some freeloading nephew instead of the owner of the house. It started with little comments. One Tuesday night, while I was studying, Jennifer poked her head in and said, "Sweetie, could you try to keep your music down after 9 p.m.? The children need their sleep, and some of us have real jobs in the morning." Real jobs. Like being a college student in my own house was less legitimate than teaching finger painting to toddlers. Dad nodded in agreement. "She's right, son. We need to be considerate of everyone living here." Meanwhile, her kids were getting bolder. Hunter figured out exactly how to push my buttons, waiting until I was on the phone or working on something important before making noise or asking obnoxious questions. One day, he asked why I didn't have a girlfriend. When I told him to mind his own business, he grinned and said his mom told him it was because I lived with my dad, like a loser. "Your mom says a lot of things," I told him. "Most of them are nonsense." "I'm telling," he shouted, running off to find Jennifer. 5 minutes later, Dad was in my room, lecturing me about being a good role model and watching my language around the children. Jennifer stood behind him with the perfect wounded expression, explaining how inappropriate it was for me to speak that way to her son. Dad demanded I apologize. I refused. That's when Jennifer's mask slipped, just for a second. She said maybe it was time I started acting like part of the family instead of some entitled teenager. A few nights later, I caught Paisley in my room again, this time going through my desk drawers. When I told her to get out, she smiled and said, "Mommy says you're just jealous because Daddy loves us more now." This wasn't just disrespect. It was Jennifer actively poisoning her kids against me. The final straw came one Sunday when I came home from Ian's to find Jennifer had gone into my room without permission and rearranged everything. My desk moved, my posters taken down, my bed remade with different sheets. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. "Language," she said automatically. "I was just organizing things. Your room was affecting the energy of the whole house." Dad came in, siding with her immediately. "She's just trying to help. Maybe you should be grateful." I told her to stay out of my room and stop touching my things. Dad ordered me to apologize again. I refused again. 3 weeks later, I was at my desk working on a paper when Dad came home. Within 2 hours, Jennifer had him moving furniture around because the flow wasn't right. An hour after that, they called me into the living room for a family meeting. I figured maybe they were announcing they'd be officially moving in together. I was wrong. Jennifer beamed like she'd just won a prize. "I'm pregnant," she announced. Dad grinned like he'd hit the jackpot. Her kids sat there with perfectly rehearsed smiles. "That's great. Congratulations," I said cautiously. But Jennifer wasn't finished. She launched into a speech with fake sweetness so thick it made my teeth hurt. "With the baby coming, we're going to need to make some major changes, more space, better organization, proper nursery, adult living arrangements." Dad nodded along. "We were thinking maybe it's time for you to experience some independence. Most people your age have moved out." Jennifer jumped in. "I actually have a wonderful apartment in the city I could rent to you, way below market rate. Market there is $1,500, but I'd only charge you $1,200. Really a steal." I stared at her. "And what happens to this place?" She smiled. "Well, your room would be the perfect nursery, and my mother will need the guest room when she comes to help with the baby." My room. The room I'd lived in since I was 12. Dad just sat there, nodding, while Jennifer pressed me to think about it, warning me not to take too long because waiting would limit everyone involved. I played along, saying I'd consider it. Her smile tightened. 2 weeks later, I came home from class to find her in my room with boxes, packing my things. My mom's photos wrapped in newspaper, my books stacked like she was preparing for a yard sale. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. "Hi, sweetie. Just helping you get started with packing," she said sweetly. "Your father and I decided it's better to get you moved sooner rather than later." When I told her to stop, the sweetness vanished. "Listen, little boy. I'm pregnant with your father's child. This house needs to work for a real family, not some overgrown teenager. You can either pack your stuff like an adult or your father will explain why this isn't negotiable. That's when I told her, this isn't your house. You don't get to pack my stuff. She ignored me and kept boxing things up until I pulled out my phone and started recording. As soon as I hit record, I asked them to repeat what they'd just said about moving me out of my house. Dad's face turned red. Put that away. This is a family discussion, not some social media drama. I kept the camera steady. Just to be clear, you're evicting me from this house? The one that belongs to me? Jennifer scoffed. It belongs to this family. Families make decisions together. You don't get to hold everyone hostage over some paperwork technicality. Paperwork technicality? I asked. Dad, whose name is on the deed? Silence. Finally, he admitted. Legally, yes, it's in your name, but... There's no but, I cut in. Legally, this is my house, and you just told me you were evicting me from it. Jennifer's face went through about 6 emotions in 10 seconds before settling on barely controlled panic. That can't be right. You're just a student. This student inherited it from my grandparents when they passed. House, land, everything, all mine. I held up my phone, showing her the proof. She sat down hard on my bed, still holding one of my boxed-up books. But your father? He pays for everything. Utilities, upkeep. Yeah, on my property, like a tenant. And those renovations? Paid for with Mom's life insurance to improve my house. The color drained from her face as she realized her plan had just imploded. So you decided to evict me from my own house and turn my bedroom into your nursery? Without even asking? Yeah, that's not going to fly. Dad was quiet for a long moment before muttering, Fine, it's your house. But you're still my son, and you're still going to do what I tell you. Actually, no, I'm not, Jennifer glared at me. This isn't over. I texted Ian immediately, deploying the nuclear option. After their failed surprise eviction, I spent the weekend doing research, not for school, but for war. Ian came over Saturday morning with coffee and his laptop. All right, he said. What's the plan? I told him plainly. I was evicting them. Both of them. Even your dad? He asked. Especially my dad. He made his choice when he tried to force me out of my own house. Ian grinned. Ruthless. I like it. What do you need? We dove into tenant rights, eviction procedures, and property law. Turns out, once someone establishes residency, like Dad and Jennifer had, you still need to go through legal channels to remove them. But since they weren't on a lease and paid no rent, they were considered tenants at will, meaning I could terminate their occupancy with a 30-day notice. And here was the fun part. I could also sue for back rent, fair market value for the time they'd been living there without a lease. At market rates for a 4-bedroom house in our area, Dad owed about $200,000 for 9 years of freeloading. Jennifer owed around $15,000 for her 6 months there. That's some expensive house playing, Ian said, whistling. Monday morning, I went to the courthouse and filed the paperwork. Tuesday, I met with a lawyer to make sure I was airtight. Wednesday, I had official eviction notices printed on letterhead. Thursday evening, I waited until they were both home and called a family meeting in the living room. We need to talk, I said, placing the folder of legal documents on the coffee table. Dad leaned back, still in alpha male mode. If this is about your attitude problem, I don't want to hear it. Actually, I said, it's about your housing situation. Jennifer's hand went to her stomach like she was shielding the baby from my words. What about our housing situation? I opened the folder and handed them their papers. You're both being evicted. 30 days notice, effective immediately. The silence was beautiful. Dad stared at his notice like it was written in another language. What the hell is this? It's an eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Dad exploded. You can't do this. I'm your father. You little... Watch me, I said calmly. Jennifer's voice shot up an octave. That's illegal. You can't kick out a pregnant woman. Actually, I can. And since you don't pay rent, you're tenants at will, which means you have even fewer rights than people with leases. Dad stood up, the vein in his forehead pulsing. This is the most ungrateful, disrespectful thing you've ever done after everything I've sacrificed for you." I gestured to the notice. "Speaking of sacrifice, read the section on owed compensation for unlawful occupancy. That's the lawsuit I'll be filing for the rent you should have been paying all this time." Jennifer scanned the paper, and I could see the exact moment her eyes landed on the numbers. "What is this?" "Fair market value for a 4-bedroom house, calculated monthly for the entire time you've both been here without a lease. For you, Dad, about $200,000. For you and your kids, Jennifer, $15,000 and counting." The color drained from both their faces. "You can't be serious," Jennifer whispered. "Dead serious. But here's the deal. You vacate within 30 days and sign an agreement not to pursue any claims, and I'll drop the lawsuit." Dad sat back down hard, still holding the paper. $200,000? He muttered. "That's what 9 years of free rent costs around here," I said evenly. Jennifer's voice grew shrill. "This is insane. We'll be homeless. I'm pregnant." "Not my problem," I replied. "You should have thought of that before you tried to steal my house." Dad stared at the eviction notice for a long moment, like he was willing the words to change. Finally, he asked, "Where are we supposed to go?" I shrugged. "Anywhere but here. Didn't Jennifer have that apartment she was so eager to rent to me?" Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "That's a 1-bedroom. We can't fit 3 adults and 2 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment." "3 adults?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "My mother," she said. "She was going to move in to help with the baby." I actually laughed. "Oh, you thought your mom was still invited to this party? That's adorable." Dad shook his head. "I can't do this. I don't have anywhere to go. All my money's tied up in this place." "Correction," I said. "It's tied up in my place. And now you know how it feels to be told you have to leave your home." Jennifer's eyes welled up, and then she started crying, angry, frustrated sobs. "This is so unfair. We were building a life here. We were going to be a family. The baby," she began again, her voice trembling. I cut her off. "The baby you got pregnant with to lock down my dad?" Her tears stopped instantly. The look she gave me was pure venom. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" I said, "Let me guess. Birth control, failure, happy accident, surprise pregnancy. All right when you needed to secure your spot here?" She stayed silent, glaring. The next morning, Ian showed up with donuts and a grin. "So, how'd they take the eviction notices?" Like you'd expect," I told him. "Lots of crying, threats, and disbelief that actions have consequences. Dad's having an existential crisis about owing me $200,000 in back rent." Ian smirked. "Beautiful. Justice served with legal paperwork." The next month was pure entertainment. Dad tried everything, consulting lawyers he couldn't afford, guilt-tripping me about family and this being our home, even offering to sign the house over to me officially if I dropped the eviction. Newsflash, I already owned the house. Signing it over would be like giving me my own birthday present. Jennifer went full scorched earth. She called my university to complain about my unstable home environment. She called the police to report a domestic disturbance when I asked her to move her car. She even called CPS on herself, claiming I was creating an unsafe environment for children, only for it to backfire when they suggested maybe she shouldn't keep her kids somewhere she considered unsafe. Finding housing for an unemployed pregnant woman, her 2 kids, a 52-year-old man with mediocre credit, and possibly her mother was harder than they'd thought. By week 4, Dad floated the idea of paying me market rent to stay. I shut it down instantly. "You had the chance to treat me with respect," I told him. "Instead, you tried to force me out of my own house. Actions have consequences." That's when Jennifer tried one last desperate move, filing a complaint that I was evicting her because she was pregnant. At the hearing, she had to admit she'd been living there 6 months, had no lease, and paid 0 rent. I got to explain how she'd tried to illegally evict me from my own property to turn my bedroom into a nursery. The judge all but laughed. "Pregnancy discrimination doesn't apply when you're being evicted for breaking the law," he told her. Case dismissed. But the real bombshell came in week 5. I was at Ian's when Dad called, his voice shaky. "We need to talk. About the baby." When I got home, he was at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. He slid one toward me, paternity test results. "The baby isn't mine," he said quietly. Turns out, when Jennifer wanted him to sign up for better health insurance to cover the pregnancy, the company required genetic screening. The results showed he couldn't be the father. Wrong blood type. The father? Her ex-husband? Apparently, they were still sleeping together when she started dating Dad. When he confronted her, she claimed the test was wrong, then tried to say it didn't matter because he'd be a better father anyway. When that didn't work, she accused him of abandoning her. He told her she had until that night to leave or he'd call the police for fraud. That night, Jennifer packed up and left. No big scene, no dramatic goodbye. Just grabbed her stuff, took the kids, and disappeared. 2 days later, Dad moved out. He rented a 1-bedroom across town, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind all the furniture and improvements he'd made. Everything he'd sunk into a house that was never his. The day after he left, Ian came over with pizza and drinks. "You ever think you'll forgive him?" he asked. "Maybe," I said, "but not today. And definitely not because he got caught being an idiot." Dad had tried to talk to me before he left. Sitting at the kitchen table, he admitted, "I screwed up bad. I chose a woman I barely knew over my own son. I tried to kick you out of your own house for someone who was lying to me from day one." I didn't sugarcoat it. "Yeah, you did, and now you're paying for it. You don't get to crawl back just because she turned out to be exactly what everyone but you saw from the start." "But I'm your father," he said, clinging to the title like it was a shield. "And I'm your son. Didn't stop you from trying to evict me. You made your choice." He looked down at the paternity results, like maybe they'd rewrite the past if he stared long enough. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway." I leaned back. "I think you're a 52-year-old man who let himself be manipulated by a 30-year-old con artist because you were thinking with your ego instead of your brain. You were so desperate to feel young and needed that you ignored every red flag. And when it mattered most, you chose her over me." He flinched like I'd slapped him. I didn't let him speak. "Now you move out, just like we agreed. End of story."